There are many questions in life that don't really have answers. Why are we here? What is the reason for our existence? What is true love? And the most important out of all these questions is, what the hell is up with the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console? We know nothing about this thing. Like, you could see how like man came to be and stuff like that, and you could feel love, but I still don't know anything about the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console, and this is high on my priority list of things I want to know about. Sure, I own a ton of games, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to have these games on my Nintendo Switch when I could take it with me wherever I go. So over on the Patreon page, there's a reward tier where you can basically tell me what kind of video you want me to make. And Alan wanted me to talk about 5 Virtual Console games that I want on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console. And at first I was just gonna go with, you know, common stuff and whatnot, but the more I thought about it, I thought it would be fun to just explore games that I really want, games that I would love to have on the system. Now, the only caveat is the game cannot be a first-party Sony or Microsoft game. Everything else, though, I'm gonna go free range, and these picks are gonna get pretty interesting as far as what games I want. So, what 5 games do I want on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console? Let's find out. In terms of probability, I'm going to get the one that probably could happen, maybe could happen on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console, and that is going to be Super Mario 64 DS. Yes, I'm not going with the standard Super Mario 64, I'm going with the DS version. And why am I going with the DS version? Because I want online play. There were some multiplayer mini games in that game. So basically, Super Mario 64 DS was a version of Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo DS. It came out pretty close to the system's launch. It may have actually been a launch title, come to think of it. God, it's crazy to think about how long the Nintendo DS has been out. I still remember getting mine like it was yesterday. But Super Mario 64 DS also incorporated 3 additional characters that you could play as. You could play as Luigi, you could play as Yoshi, and you could play as Wario. And because of this, they had different things added into the game, so it was actually a whole lot of fun. Now, I believe this did actually come out on the Wii U's Virtual Console. I could be wrong, but it did not have any online multiplayer. And that is what I want in the Nintendo Switch version. Think of how much fun it would be to run around, you know, this massive castle with a friend, or do the mini games with a friend. There's definitely ways they could incorporate this into a real thing. You might remember there was a Super Mario 64 online hack that was floating around that Nintendo, of course, shut down. Maybe that's why they did it, because they plan to add multiplayer into Super Mario 64 DS online multiplayer on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console. So I think Super Mario 64 regardless will be on the platform, whether it's the Nintendo 64 version or the Nintendo DS version. But if I had to pick which one I really want on there, I'm gonna go with the DS version because it added some extra stuff, and I think it would be really fun to be able to do this added stuff with your friends online. So Super Mario 64 DS, I'm picking you, buddy. I'm picking you. Alright, so let's start to get a little bit crazy here. One of my favorite game franchises is Metal Gear Solid, and Metal Gear Solid is not, you know, a game franchise that really comes on Nintendo platforms. You did have Metal Gear Solid 3 3D on the Nintendo 3DS, and you did have Solid Snake and Super Smash Bros. For the Wii. So it's not outside the realm of possibility for Snake to show up on a Nintendo platform. And you may remember one of his best games, in my opinion, was actually on the GameCube, and that was Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. Now, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes was essentially a remaster of Metal Gear Solid for the PlayStation 1. They incorporated many elements from Metal Gear Solid 2 as far as the controls are concerned, and it pretty much had that same graphical style. But I really enjoyed playing through that game. That was actually the first time I beat Metal Gear Solid, was on Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, and then I went back to the series and played it and beat it on the PlayStation 1. But Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes is still a really great looking game. They redid some of the voices, and the cutscenes are very, very over the top, and that turned a lot of people off. But as the Metal Gear Solid series went on, it got more and more over the top. And I think the first game was pretty much rooted in things, you know, that could potentially happen. There was some interesting things and weird things, you know, supernatural wise. But I think as the series progressed and the series started to go on with characters like Vamp and whatnot, it became apparent that they didn't want it to be, you know, something rooted in reality. The stories are rooted in reality, but the gameplay and the cutscenes are supposed to be a little bit eccentric and they're supposed to be, you know, a little bit different. And Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes was a GameCube exclusive. It is an amazing game. It's a bit of a pricey GameCube game, and it's a game that I would love to see on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console. It would be totally sweet to see how good that game looks on the Switch's screen, and although I own it, I feel like it would introduce a lot of different people into the Metal Gear Solid universe. So Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, that's my number 2. Grand Theft Auto clones at one time were a dime a dozen. I'm actually going to do a video on Grand Theft Auto clones, showing you guys which ones I think are the best, because there's a lot of them, and there's actually a lot of really good ones. But when Grand Theft Auto 3 saw a lot of success, everyone wanted to do this sort of open world sandbox style game. And one of the games that I feel is one of the greatest licensed games of all time is Simpsons Hit and Run. Simpsons Hit and Run is amazing. If you've never played Simpsons Hit and Run, please go to eBay and pick up a copy, or go to your local retro gaming store and pick up a copy. It came out on all platforms, PS2, Xbox, and the GameCube. But Simpsons Hit and Run is essentially The Simpsons in a Grand Theft Auto universe. And although the Simpsons game in the arcade was great, most of the ones that came out on home console were subpar at best. Most of them really stunk. And then here comes Simpsons Hit and Run, which is like the Simpsons game everyone has wanted since the dawn of time. You play in this open world atmosphere where you can play as all the different main characters from The Simpsons, and there's tons of references, there's tons of music, there's tons of voiceover work, there's, you know, stuff pertaining to different episodes and whatnot. Like, it's just chock full of Simpsons love, and it's actually a really fun game to play. And the missions do get a bit monotonous at times. You know, there's a lot of racing missions and whatnot, but the game just looks and feels so good. And it's a game that I feel that a lot of people have simply forgotten about. Like, when's the last time you heard someone talk about Simpsons Hit and Run? Like, it's still a game you could pop in today. It still looks good. It still plays great. Why does nobody ever really talk about Simpsons Hit and Run? I'm going to talk about Simpsons Hit and Run. And it's hard to say Simpsons Hit and Run over and over again. Simpsons Hit and Run, Simpsons Hit and Run, Simpsons Hit and Run. See, I messed up. But yeah, I would love that game on the Switch, dude. Simpsons Hit and Run is one of my favorite Grand Theft Auto clones, for sure. Now, if you're an avid watcher of this channel, you know I love Sega. Sega is great. And the final 2 games we're going to talk about are Sega games. The first one I want to talk about is a game that released late in the Sega Saturn's life cycle, a game I never thought I would own, but then came Milton. Milton, my guardian angel. Milton, potentially the love of my life. Milton sent me Panzer Dragoon Saga. And this was a game that I've wanted to play forever, and I honestly never thought I would be able to, but thanks to Milton, the amazing Milton, I'm able to play that game. And I've been playing it a lot. I'm actually going to do a full review of it, but it's a very unique JRPG game where you're commanding this dragon, and it sort of plays out in a turn-based style. There's on-foot segments where you're doing little missions and stuff like that. There's a lot of hidden things I'm finding in the game. You know, things that I might have missed. I'm going back and like looking through FAQs of like disc 1 stuff, and I'm like, how did I miss that? You know, little side quests, little side stories, and it's just an amazing game to see on the Sega Saturn, because there weren't many 3D, you know, sort of open RPGs on the Sega Saturn. It was just mostly, you know, traditional JRPG style stuff. There wasn't anything quite like a Final Fantasy VII or anything. But I really think Panzer Dragoon Saga is just an amazing game. It's also a very expensive game. And since it is a first-party Sega title, Sega has put tons of stuff on the, you know, Nintendo Virtual Consoles as the years have gone on, both on the Wii and on the Wii U. Obviously, Sega Saturn games are not that big. Most of these games are disc-based games, but they're not that big to download. And the emulation has been coming along. I'm sure they would have to do something special for the Sega Saturn, because Sega Saturn emulation is still, you know, it still has a ways to go, but I would love to see Panzer Dragoon Saga just so that other people can play that game, because it's a game that really needs to be experienced, and it's an amazing game. So Panzer Dragoon Saga, number 4 pick. Now the final pick I have for you guys is a game that I think could come to the platform, only because there is a new entry coming in the series, and there's been rumors about an HD remaster, blah blah blah. That's fine. I will just take the original version of the game, and that is Shenmue on the Dreamcast. Shenmue. If you do not know what Shenmue is, you are missing out. You need to pick up a Dreamcast and buy Shenmue and play Shenmue. Shenmue is love. So Shenmue is basically a story where a man named Lan Di kills your father pretty much in front of you, and you play as Ryo Hazuki, and you go throughout Japan trying to figure out what's going on. But Shenmue is one of those games that it really transcended, it pretty much transcended video games for me, because it was unlike anything you have ever played. Like, it was a living, breathing world where people had schedules, and, you know, shops would be open during certain times. And although that's, you know, pretty commonplace today, during that time, the Dreamcast era, there was nothing like that. You had never seen anything like that. It was just so crazy how all the NPCs just had their own, you know, sort of personality and their own stuff that they would do throughout the day. And you can only find certain people during the day. You can only find certain people during the night. You could literally follow people and watch what they were doing. And it was just such an amazing game. A lot of puzzle solving, a lot of deep, intricate story. And I just think it would be awesome to be able to play that game portably. Just play that game wherever you are. Adam Koralik is actually in Japan right now, and he made a tweet saying that he was walking around a certain section of Japan listening to the Shenmue soundtrack and how surreal it was. Imagine how surreal it would be to be able to play Shenmue on your Nintendo Switch while in Japan, while going through sections in the game that you know, and places in Japan that were modeled for the game. That would be insane. And man, I would just love to see Shenmue, because really the final two games that I talked about would pretty much include Sega Saturn and Dreamcast support on the Virtual Console. And in my opinion, it needs to be something special. We saw a lot of great consoles on the Wii. The Wii U's Virtual Console was pretty weak in my opinion compared to the Wii's. So they need to take this next step. You're going to be charging for online. Give us as much as you can, Nintendo. Give us as much as you can. And those are the 5 games I want to see on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console. What do you want to see on the Nintendo Switch's Virtual Console? Let me know in the comments section down below. Thank you for checking out this video. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.